Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Welcome back to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today we're speaking with Elise Sernik. Elise Sernik is the Executive Director of Leadership Space. Elise launched Leadership Space to assist social purpose leaders and executive and board teams to succeed in times of change. Elise draws on a deep and varied knowledge and expertise base that is a product of a 20-year career in the commercial and social purpose sectors in Australia and globally. Leadership Space works with some of the most well-known names in the sector, as well as social entrepreneurs and innovative change agents across the commercial social purpose spectrum. Their vision is a thriving social purpose economy. Welcome to Sproutcast, Elise.
Thank you very much, Julia. Wonderful to be here.
Great. Well, given Elise's extensive experience with leadership, kickstarting and revitalising leadership in the NFP space, we will obviously be steering our discussion today strongly down that path. But I did want to first start off with asking you, Elise, what your first experiences with the NFP or purpose space were like, how that kind of relationship began.
I think it's a really interesting question, your kind of first contact with the space. And for clarity, I call it the social purpose space or sector. And I can talk a little bit more about why I do that later if that's of interest. I mean, as I think about myself, really, my real history comes from the level of my grandparents. So I'm the granddaughter of two sets of people who were escapees from the Holocaust. And I think, what I grew up with was a really personal sense that, we have a responsibility to create the world that we want to live in. The values that are lived by in the world, the things that are kept sacred. And so, very early on for me, I guess, community was a big part of my life, and social responsibility was a big part of my upbringing. And I certainly, I think as I kind of navigated my career in and out of closer to and then further away from and then back closer to sort of social purpose questions and issues, what's become really clear to me is that when I'm living from that place and I'm working in this space, I really feel like I'm on my purpose. I'm in my dharma. However, you kind of conceive of that. So I think, in terms of out in the world, I studied third world politics. I went and lived in South America, and I was exposed to the third world and issues kind of at the forefront, rather than from the sort of university lecture room. So that's probably, my first exposure to the issues, if you like. And then I actually went into news and current affairs with the BBC early on in my career, and so that was kind of starting to engage with the politics and theory of international development and the kind of concerns and the issues on a bigger scale. But I didn't really decide that I wanted to kind of translate that into an interest in working in social purpose organisations or making that the kind of centrepiece of my career until I was in my early 30s, and I'd had a commercial career, if you like, albeit not in banks, but in media and strategy and that kind of area. And I decided, having kind of locked myself away for 3 months, really, to reevaluate what I was doing and where I really wanted to go. And what came out of that for me was actually I wanted to be working in organisations that were working on the issues in a day-to-day way that I felt were, most important. And interestingly, what I did then was try and balance my comfort level with corporate, commercial, professional culture with the cause area. So I ended up entering the sector not in an issue that, was kind of top of mind, although I had a funny experience in the first, after kind of talking to recruiters and being told that I needed to go back to volunteering and sort of started the volunteers in the organisation. I wasn't really happy with that approach, and I ended up joining kind of in more senior position, but I got 5 job offers in a week, and one of them was in child rights and international development, and another one was in health, and they were kind of spotted all over the sector. And I actually decided to take the organisation that, in this case, it was asthma. So, not a big heartstring cause, but an organisation that I felt like would give me a really good introduction into the sector, and that was professional and would allow me to really leverage my commercial skills in a kind of transitioning way into the sector. That was kind of my first real job, if you like, in the sector in any substantial way.
Wonderful. So this first position, was it the Asthma Foundation?
It was called when I joined it was called the National Asthma Campaign. And clearly that was not a particularly engaging business name. One of the things that the new CEO who had just recently joined, she had in her sights a complete rebrand. Strategically, the organisation wasn't, playing in the field in the way that it could. And so, her vision was to turn this into a regional, regional power, I guess, and broker in terms of government and influencing respiratory health policy and, becoming a consumer brand that was a success. So we rebranded, and I was a big part of that, as part of the marketing and fundraising leadership team. We rebranded as Asthma UK.
And so when you first stepped into this role, Elise, was it a very different experience than some of the other roles you'd held in the past? Was it a different culture, or what made it different from, or how did it feel different working in the the social purpose sector?
I think because of the decision I'd made, it didn't feel hugely different. I also, and this is something that I counsel, because I do a lot of work with people who are transitioning from the commercial sector and into the social purpose environment. And one of the things that I learnt from doing this myself is that it's really worth taking the time to get yourself up to speed. By the time I walked into the interview with Asthma UK, as it became, I knew the jargon, I knew loads of people, I'd really familiarised myself with the culture and topics and issues, and had sort of done the translating work from what I was used to doing into what the organisation needed. So it was a very smooth transition for me. I thought the quality of the people they were recruiting was great, and really it was just about kind of learning more information. I hadn't worked with research departments in health, for example, before, and I hadn't had to navigate fundraising partnerships, but I had done, commercial partnerships, and so I brought the same mindset, which is, it's a value exchange. What does each party need to get out of this? And it's about relationship building and having a really clear story. And so, if there was stuff that was crunchy, it was probably, for me, being able to confidently navigate the sensitivities inside the organisation with, like most social purpose organisations, the frontline staff, the people who are on the phones, in this case, to the callers or the nurses, who were sensitive about, how we talked about people with asthma and that they weren't asthmatics, and, what stories you could share and how you do that respectfully. So, that was the kind of stuff that I had to be aware of and learn to confidently navigate.
Excellent. So I think this transition that you're talking about is something that potentially a lot of our listeners are either going through or thinking of or hoping to go through. And it's interesting to hear that that's something that you, I guess, have mentored or assisted other people to go through. Aside from some of the issues you've already mentioned that you experienced yourself, what do you find that other people struggle with in this transition, and how do you work through it with them?
Look, I think the biggest obstacle when you're making the transition is to kind of give it the gravitas it deserves. We're not, we don't learn at school how to do this. We, so many, I work with people of all ages, probably the youngest are, in their late 20s, early 30s, and the oldest are up into their 60s. And kind of across the board, it's like, okay, so where's the handbook on doing this? And some implicit belief that this should be easy, that I should know how to do this, that this, this should come second nature. And I think that that's really kind of unfair on ourselves, because this isn't easy, this isn't obvious. I think I've got such a passion for this because I've taken myself through a whole series of transitions. Every kind of 3 years or so, my rhythm is that I become interested in a new shift. And so I've kind of steered myself through those and accessing support from people and just kind of pausing. I think there's nothing wrong with, in my case, the first time I did it, I locked myself away in a room with a whole bunch of butcher's paper and every good book I could find on it. And I was like, right, how do you do this? And I think for my clients that when they hear it's like, oh, okay, I'm allowed to take time, and, it's reasonable to take 3 to 6 months to do this and to approach it strategically, and all the value I'll get from thinking about myself, really doing a good self-audit. What is my purpose in life? I had a client the other day, and I asked him, at the end of the session, what was valuable? And he's like, I have never sat down and given the big question of who I am and what I want to achieve in the world the kind of time, and this was only an hour and a half session, it's not like, we spend 6 weeks on it, but just spending an hour and a half saying, well, what's really important to me? What's the kind of big pathway journeys that are the markers of my life? And I think when you do that and you get clearer on your purpose, you get clearer on your values, and you think about things like, who are the people I love working with? What's the criteria for me of a really great working environment? And for some people, do I believe that I can have a career that meets all my needs? Have I made some decision that I have to choose, and over on the one side is, money and lifestyle, and on the other side is satisfaction, and I've made some arbitrary decision that I can't have it all. And I think a lot of my work with people is, what if you could have it all? What would that look like? And let's define what that means. And then how do you approach that creatively so that you have a good mix? You've got choice, but you can't do that unless you kind of really got clear yourself. And I think that one of the things that's really helpful is and it doesn't have to be, someone like myself as a paid, person. You can find a thought partner, a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a family member, and, get to the point where you have a 3-sentence elevator pitch that totally nails what it is that you are doing or what you want to be doing that makes sense to other people, and being able to dialogue that through so that you can articulate it and someone else can help you find the words. And, I think a lot of the time I kind of think that because it's not top of mind, it mustn't be real. But, I like to sort of highlight to people that when you're grappling for words, it's because it's something that's just beyond the horizon of what you've been able to describe for yourself before. And so to take the time to kind of reach out into that emerging future and find your language or metaphors that feature you, so that you've got an anchor. That's doing the work yourself. And then the next bit is if it's a social purpose career you're interested in, the sector is a bit like a goldfish bowl. It's very small, really, proportionally, and 650,000 organisations. But, when you think about what you want to do and you get really clear on the 5 to 10 organisations you want to work for, the handful of roles you really want, and that might be, anything from setting up my own social, purpose business, or becoming a social entrepreneur, or, working for an organisation that's commercial but, has a social purpose mission, or it might be working for a charity, so anywhere in that spectrum, finding out who the people are. People hire people, and not all jobs are advertised, and so being able to be a proactive agent in your own, in manifesting, creating, tilling the soil so that actually the plant that you want grows. I think that's really important, a really important message, and one I think that makes sense of why it takes time, to get out there and talk to people. And it's a learning journey. It's for those that know the concept of action research. This is the ultimate action research. It's process of going out, learning, listening, and coming back and reflecting. What did I just hear that was really gelled to me? Okay, what would I do next with that? How does that change what I'm saying? So yeah, long
Fantastic.
answer.
Yeah, it is, but there was a lot in there. And I think it sounds like a really valuable discussion that you're having with people, and must be a rewarding experience for you, because I think there's so many people struggling with that decision of where to go next, and also how to get there. And I think another transition that it would be really beneficial to our listeners for us to talk about is perhaps transitioning between different leadership positions or different kind of levels of responsibility. Perhaps if we think of a scenario where someone is moving from either a middle management or kind of lower executive position to something more higher up, or even to starting their own organization, how would they, or like how would you assist someone to grapple with that shift in responsibility?
Yeah, I think the similar principles apply. So this notion of it's just a slightly different manifestation. So what is it about the way I am? What is it about my management style, my leadership, my emerging often leadership style? And so, a lot of value for people comes out of stepping back and saying, okay, what kind of leader do I want to be? Do I have examples where I've met people and go, yeah, it's that. If I don't have examples, how do I get some so that I have some real live touch points? They might be figures from books or movies or TV shows. They might be real people I've met and worked with. And inevitably with our kind of role models, there are things that we go, I really like the way they did that, but actually, what I noticed, there was some collateral damage in this area of what they did, or I never felt really quite as engaged as I could. I wonder what it is about the way they spoke that, that has that effect. So mining your own experience and creating a really clear sense for yourself about what do you want to be, how do you want to be experienced, and, starting that in a really practical way. So with clients, we might talk about a meeting that's coming up. It's like, well, what's my power position? What's the source of my power in this relationship? What kind of leader do I want to be experienced as? How am I going to create that experience? So what my messaging like, my language, my body posture, who do I need to negotiate with so that everybody's walking into the room or into the meeting feeling like they're really, being heard. I had a client the other day, and, I shared that, for a lot of people, just simply doing the exercise of saying, how much of this experience, this meeting or whether it's a one-on-one or a group setting, am I going to be doing the talking, and what percentage am I going to be listening? And just being able to kind of do that. So, okay, and I say this when I do presenting and facilitate at workshops and conferences and so forth, whoever's doing the most talking is doing the most learning. So if you want somebody else to be doing the learning, you need to be quiet. You need to ask really important questions and powerful, thoughtful questions, and you need to be quiet and let the other person's brain work. That's, as a manager, being able to really understand what role you're playing and understanding how coaching as a methodology supports other people's growth around you and their ability to thrive and feel like they've got agency and effectiveness, is such a critical competency. So, yeah, doing the thinking, I think, about who you are and the reflecting and how you want to be experienced makes a really, really big difference. And for a lot of people, and you'd be unbelievably surprised, I work with very senior people who've got, 30 and 40 years experience and have never paused to say, oh, yeah, what kind of a leader am I? How am I doing that? What kind of a manager am I? What am I leaning into, and what strengths am I building, and what are my blind spots, and how do I make sure that they don't trip me out?
And so is understanding, I guess, the mechanics of the type of leader you are, would you say that kind of helps you to embrace perhaps the weaknesses of that and then lean on the strengths? And kind of how do you move from kind of understanding that to then improving or reworking it as necessary?
Adults are experiential. So I think, one of the reasons why I've moved into a coaching model, and one of the reasons why I think it's really effective is because and you can create this in different ways, but if you understand the principles, then you know what you're working with. But it's a process of reflection, action, moving into actually doing it, and then back into reflection and planning again. I wrote an article recently about, this notion that learning is a spiral, and that, you take any issue, you sort of have to go, we're sort of absorbed in some ways, I think a lot of us, this notion that, learning and success is a 90-degree straight line. You start at incompetence and you work your way to competence and you just work hard and work up that trajectory. The reality is that for the really important learning and development journeys, what's more true, and this is borne out by enormous amounts of educational research and is really the leading thinking in terms of education and growth, and it's very true of adults as much as it is of children. And you see that if you've got your own children, they have to go, and people and humans have to go around the same theme, issue, experience multiple times, and each time you make that loop, if you're reflecting on it, what you do is you understand more deeply what's just happened. You notice someone's behaviour and you make a connection about how that's connected to something you said or they said, or a contextual point about what's influencing all of you. If you can bring more tools and frameworks and principles to that, you get better. You get better at it. Things that were conscious competence, you build on things that you were doing unconsciously unconscious incompetence, you bring into your consciousness so you can actually do them, more easily and not sort of do them by happenstance. So I think kind of having an awareness that and a kindness for yourself, so often with clients what will happen is the value that they get from being with me isn't that some big new piece of information has come out. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just, I've never thought of that in just that way, and now that makes sense to me. I'm going to do that with more ease, and I sort of can see what my next horizon of growth is. And and being able to be comfortable that that's okay, rather than going, I've done change management once before. Why isn't this going well? It's like, well, because it's really complicated, and it's complex. So, well, what's the power play, operating? What's the strategy? How are the processes supporting that? What's happening interpersonally? And then if you go around that loop, you're like, okay, I've kind of evolved as a result of that experience.
We've talked about how leaders lead, I guess, down through the organisation and assist staff and run their organisation, or they're part of their organisation in that way. But it would be great also to chat with you about how leadership is different in a group setting, or kind of sideways leadership, and how emerging leaders or new leaders can adjust to working perhaps with a board or as part of an executive team. What were your kind of thoughts or advice on that?
One of the really big opportunities that new leaders or, emerging leaders and even actually quite established leaders can benefit from is having an awareness of where that kind of role tends to trip up. So, for example, if you're a founder in a new social purpose organisation, as one example, knowing that one of the things that's most likely to trip you up down the road is your relationship with the board, in as much as, are you on the board? Are you, what's the power of the board to fire you? How are you going to choose board members and your relationship with your chair, so that you are planning for, at some point in the future, succession? Are you planning for this organisation to die with you, or are you creating something that is going to live beyond you? And in which case, what does that look like down the road? Founder syndrome in our sector is really significant, and it hamstrings organisations' capacity to move from startup to sustainability, to longevity. So, that kind of knowing some of those patterns and being able to preempt them a little bit. One of the other things that another passion, if you like, that recurs is that as organisations move from startup to sustainability, they need to create a layer of management underneath that CEO, whether that's a founder or someone else. And that typically is quite a challenging task, and one that often isn't done early enough. So, and the reasons for that is often either a lack of clarity that that's actually what's required by the senior manager, or nervousness that they don't really know how to bring people in a way that's aligned with their values. So kind of doing that thinking early on to say, well, what's the skill set that I have that is most valuable? Is it that I'm the CEO, or is it actually, what I really love doing is program management, and I don't want to be a business leader and, a business, I don't want to attend to the financial side, or I don't want to attend to the stakeholder management or the fundraising or whatever, and having the sort of emotional maturity to position yourself inside the organization in the way that's most suitable to what you love and where your real value is, and to bring people around you and build, and learn to have trust with them. Because it is really like, if you set something up yourself, it's very much like handing over a baby. And so, that's a huge process. So I think taking the time, to do that well, bring people in, make sure that they're really empowered to contribute and add value. And that's absolutely true whether they're directors or senior managers inside the business. Often what happens is we kind of give people responsibility but don't give them the power to exercise it, and then wonder why they're not adding value and why they then start misbehaving by grabbing power or throwing it around or disengaging. So when you start seeing those behaviours, I think, it's incumbent upon the CEO or the executive director to ask themselves what role they're playing in that, and be careful about just finger pointing. It's usually a dynamic that you've unconsciously set up in some way, and it might be that you've chosen the wrong people. That's often part of it, but it's never all of it.
Excellent. I thought we might shift gears a little again now and bring it back to how someone who hasn't previously been working in the sector and they're really interested in being involved. I just was wanting to know what kind of suggestions you might have for someone in this position about how to get started, how they can learn more and work out what they're interested in.
First thing I would say is it's a wonderful journey to go on. So, if it's an area that people are interested in or are curious about, take the time, because it will be a really fulfilling journey. The other thing I would say is kind of the sector is no more healthy culturally in lots of ways than the commercial sector. So there's a huge amount of diversity in the sector. There are some organisations which are wonderful places to work, and where, people find that their skills and interests and passions absolutely are borne out. And there are places that are, to be honest, toxic. So, going looking and having, not having sort of your golden goggles on about what, what you're going to find, or tarnishing everyone with the same brush. I think, being really grounded in that and knowing that diversity is significant depending on the size of organisations and the cause areas that they work in and their genesis, whether they're entrepreneurial or organisations that have been around for hundreds of years. There's huge diversity. In terms of, starting out, reading is great. If you're a reader, then that's a wonderful way to start to get your head around it. So there are lots of really fabulous and free services out there that can give you a great insight to organisations and themes and issues. Social Event Australia Consulting, SEO Consulting had one. Obviously, Better Boards, you put material out. I have a newsletter. So, getting out there and just starting to read stuff, attending conferences and attending, meetings, going to anything that you can that gives you exposure to the people and the issues. I think is a really great way. It's certainly, when I was transitioning and in that 3 months, I read a lot, went to conferences, I met people. So that's really important. Networking is critical. So, finding out who's who in the zoo. And to do that, you really need to, narrow things down because, 650,000 organisations is a bit much to get your head around, So you kind of need to start to think, well, what really interests me? And it might be it's based on cause, international development or whatever. But it also might be, I'm interested in entrepreneurial organisations, or I'm interested in shared value, or I'm interested in the intersection between government and the social purpose sector. So, understanding the breadth and the themes and the ways that you can cut and dice this is important. And you're going to get that by reading, by talking to people, and obviously by volunteering. So, again, I would say, there's everything from very coal-face volunteering, in soup kitchens and so forth, to very high end. Obviously, at the very top is board roles, but there's a huge amount of breadth in between. And there are lots of organisations that are there to support and help you to find volunteering opportunities. And, if you're already in a corporate environment, using that as a launchpad is, makes sense. So, looking at what programs you have for job swaps or for the project, skill volunteering project work or anything like that. My words of warning are that when you're thinking about your engagement in the sector, it's behoven on you to also think about the impact you're having on the sector. So, for example, the social purpose sector suffers from the demands that are placed upon it to provide high volume, satisfying volunteering experiences for short amounts of time. You need to ask yourself, is this really of value to the social purpose organisation? Am I actually representing a cost to that organisation in exchange for money? And is that right? Or, is this real value? And being careful not to, again, reading and looking into the sector will help you understand, where are the tension points between the sector and other parts of the economy, and how do you support the sector to thrive and not sort of suffer from those things. So being of value, thinking about what value you're bringing and making sure that it's, you are being really thoughtful and wise about how you engage so that you're adding value and getting the breadth of, exposure you need, but also making sure that you are you're a source of assistance for issues. I've done all sorts of things in my volunteering time. One of the most satisfying was working as a therapist, which is my training in heroin addiction, and I worked on Lifeline and as a crisis counsellor. And for me, they were a perfect match because they extended my skills and experience. They were doing what I loved and where I can add real value. And they were of service, So I think looking for those, because that's where you really think, this is a part of my life, and it all really lines up.
Really practical and sage advice there. I guess for my final question, I wanted to come back full circle to you and your experience in the sector and just ask you about what makes you excited to work in the sector now. What are you excited about that you're involved in or that you'd like to tell people about? Maybe can you tell me about a time when working in this space has surprised you or blown your mind?
I am incredibly lucky. I feel like I have that almost every day of my working life without exaggeration. And I say lucky, but really, I think through a process of putting myself through the processes I insist my clients put themselves through, I found kind of the very sweet spot of what I love doing and where I add value. And that's an incredible opportunity and blessing, and one I'm honestly deeply grateful for every day. In terms of the what am I excited about? Lots of things. In a macro scale, I think that, my personal purpose is to create a thriving social purpose economy. And there are more things going on now than I've ever seen before. The quality of the people who are working on issues like shared value, the awareness around the importance of, us as individual human beings attending to our own growth and our own wisdom, and the way that then directly leads to creating organisations that are healthier and more values aligned and more powerful and impactful. I think, that whole narrative has become so much stronger than it was a while ago. There are areas of the social purpose sector that are really going to struggle and are struggling, but I also think that what's driving that, the drive for more responsibility and alignment between the consumer being the same person who is also the customer, so the client and the customer becoming one and the same, which, for those who aren't aware, is a driver from the National Disability Insurance Scheme and other government policy. I think that's really helpful. It's tough, and, my commitment is to try and help those organisations who are faced with that enormous challenge to navigate it well and to survive, not die in it. And I want the sector to continue and to grow and to thrive. And, these things are clearly challenges. But I think, overall, there is more of a dialogue and commitment to a sort of ecological, sustainable, well-being driven, wiser society than I have, I think that's growing, and that makes me thrilled. I have my days where I think it's all terrible and dire, but as a general rule, I think that when we're kind of, there's a lot of people moving in the right direction, and that's wonderful. I'm a meditator and somebody who really loves the wisdom traditions from the East, and I think, the ability to be able to walk into a boardroom and say, let's all spend a minute just, arriving and getting into our bodies and becoming present, you can do that, and nobody's like, who is this hippie? So I think that's a really positive thing. On a personal front, what I'm excited about is, Leadership Space, which is the entity I created, is a social purpose business surrounded by other social purpose businesses, and that's wonderful, a community of, like-minded organisations and wonderful, people who get in touch because they're interested in being part of that, and that's exciting. In terms of the work we do, podcasts like yourselves and, having amazing people to interview, like Aaron Hurst from, which was thanks to Better Boards, and that your role in bringing him out to Australia so that, being able to, I guess one of my real interests when I set this up was being able to get information and the voices of leading thinkers out to a wider community, and that's, being able to do that increasingly is very, very satisfying.
Well, before we finish, how can people get in touch with you or find out more about Leadership Space if they're interested?
Our website is leadershipspace.com.au, and you can go on there and subscribe to our newsletter. That's a really easy way to get articles about what's happening in the sector and leadership tips and that kind of thing. It's a very simple, accessible thing, and we release that. We're releasing it monthly. It'll probably go to bi-monthly. And on that, on the website, you can also find podcasts from visionary people we love about the big issues, which is a half-hour nice way to absorb some information about the sector. There's also articles and information there and other stuff. So that's you can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. It's called Conversations That Shape Us. And I'm always happy to take calls from people who want to have a chat and understand more. So feel free to do that, and myself or one of my colleagues will be really happy to have a conversation.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Elise. Thank you for your thoughtful responses and your practical advice. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure, Julia. Great to be here.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.